I always believed that life becomes easier when you learn to stay quiet. I grew up hearing things like, good men don't argue, family comes first, and sacrifice makes you stronger. These lines became the foundation of my entire personality without me even realizing it. For years, silence was not something I used to protect peace. It was something I used because I didn't know any other way to survive. I thought if I stayed calm, stayed responsible, stayed understanding, then people would do the same for me. But as I grew older, I learned the truth the hard way. The more silent you are, the easier it becomes for people to take advantage of you. My days used to start slow. A soft alarm tone at 6:15 a.m., the same cracked mug filled with hot tea, the same walk to the workshop where I fixed broken appliances for a living. I didn't earn much, but I earned enough to keep the house running, and for me, that was enough. I didn't dream of luxuries, just peace, stability, and maybe a little appreciation. But peace is the first thing to disappear when you live with people who don't value you. My wife, Sarah, was the quiet type too, but her silence was different from mine. Mine came from patience. Hers came from irritation. In the early years of our marriage, she used to smile at me, waiting near the window when I returned home from work. She used to ask about my day, gently place food in front of me, and talk about small things, nothing important. But it made the house feel warm. I used to think that warmth would last forever. But warmth doesn't disappear. Suddenly, it fades, the same way daylight fades in the evening, slowly, quietly, without warning. She stopped asking about my day. She stopped waiting near the window. She stopped smiling at my small jokes. At first, I told myself she was just tired. Then, I told myself she was stressed. Then I told myself marriage naturally becomes boring over time. But deep inside, a small voice kept whispering, something is changing. The real shift began when my younger brother, Mark, started coming over almost every day. Mark and I were nothing alike. If I was the quiet one, he was the loud one. If I was responsible, he was careless. If I built things, he broke them. If I waited patiently for life to give me something, he believed he deserved it without earning it. Our parents had always spoiled him. Even when he made mistakes, they defended him. Even when he wasted money, they gave him more. Even when he lied, they called it immaturity. And when they passed away, that responsibility fell onto me. I still remember the day he brought home that motorcycle. He rode it into my driveway like he was starring in his own movie. Sunglasses on, jacket half-zipped, hair messy, and that look at me, I don't care style he loved. He stopped the bike, took off his helmet, flashed me a grin and said, "Bro, can I park this here for a few weeks? I'm, sorting out some paperwork." Some paperwork usually meant I'm hiding this from someone, but I didn't question him. I never did. I opened the shed, moved aside old boxes, and made space for the bike. I remember the smell of gasoline filling the shed as he parked the motorcycle inside. He patted my shoulder and said, "You're a lifesaver." And then he left without explaining anything. Sarah watched the whole scene from the kitchen window. She didn't say a word, but the look on her face said enough. That night when we were eating dinner, she finally sighed and said, "He'll never grow up if you keep helping him like this." I nodded, but what was I supposed to say? He's my only brother. He has no one else? He'll change one day. Even I didn't believe those things anymore. And then something unexpected happened. Sarah, who used to feel irritated by Mark, slowly became comfortable around him. Too comfortable. They started talking more, first small talks, then private jokes. She started defending him even when he was clearly wrong. There were moments when they exchanged glances I didn't understand. Moments when they shared laughter I wasn't part of. Moments when I walked into the room and everything suddenly went silent. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. I didn't want to believe anything else. Then came the night that changed everything for me. A neighbor casually mentioned seeing Mark speeding on the motorcycle. He almost hit a dog, the neighbor laughed. Tell him to be careful. But the motorcycle was in my shed that morning, cold, unused. So how did he ride it? The confusion sat in my chest like a heavy stone. I didn't mention it to Sarah right away. I wanted to think. I wanted to understand. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. But what hurt me wasn't the motorcycle. It was Sarah's reaction when I finally did ask her. I asked calmly, "Did Mark come by today?" She froze for a split second, a very small moment, but big enough for someone who notices everything. Then she said too quickly, "No, why would he?" And before I could open my mouth again, she added in a slightly irritated tone, "Don't start overthinking things." Overthinking. That word stuck to my ribs like a thorn. It wasn't the first time she had used it. Every time I noticed something strange, I was overthinking. Every time I questioned something, I was imagining things. Every time I felt something was wrong, she made me feel like the problem was me. That night, while she slept beside me, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking. I was simply thinking. Really thinking. Slowly, like pulling apart an old memory, I went through every moment, every strange silence, every unexplained lie, every shift in tone. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. What if I've been blind this whole time? The night felt longer than usual. The darkness felt heavier. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized something that changed my life forever. My silence wasn't protecting my home. It was destroying me. And the storm that was coming, I wasn't ready for it. The morning after that sleepless night, everything in the house felt slightly different. Not visibly, not dramatically, just a small shift in the air, like the first signs of a storm you can't yet see but can definitely smell. Sarah moved around the kitchen like she always did, cracking eggs, flipping toast, placing things on the counter with that familiar rhythm she had built over the years. But there was a slight rush in her movements, a quiet stiffness in her shoulders, a hint of impatience in the way she responded to my good morning greeting. It wasn't new, but it felt heavier now that my eyes were open. I left for work earlier than usual, not because I had extra tasks, because I couldn't stand the feeling of sitting in that house, pretending everything was normal. On the walk to the workshop, my mind replayed every small moment from the past year. The sudden change in Sarah's tone, the growing closeness between her and Mark, that freezing hesitation she showed before answering my question. Even the way she sometimes stood closer to him than to me. It was like noticing cracks in a wall you thought was strong enough to protect you, only to realize they had been slowly spreading while you were too busy fixing everything else around you. At work, I tried to distract myself. I opened up a washing machine motor, removed its rusted bearings, cleaned the gunk sitting between the coils. Normally, the focus required calmed me. The mechanical rhythm helped me forget the world outside. But that day, no matter how deep my hands were inside broken appliances, my mind was somewhere else, stuck inside my own home, trying to understand what was happening. That evening, when I returned home, Sarah wasn't in the living room like she usually was. Instead, she was standing near the mirror, adjusting her hair in a way I hadn't seen her do in months. She had put on a nicer shirt too, not something formal, just something she would normally wear when expecting company. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling building in my stomach. "Going somewhere?" I asked. She looked at me through the mirror, her expression unreadable for a moment before she shrugged. "Just felt like getting ready." "Is that a problem?" Her voice wasn't loud, but the sharpness in it stung. Like asking about her day was a crime. "No," I replied quietly. I was just asking. Minutes later, as I washed my face, I heard a motorcycle engine loud. Familiar, painfully familiar. That same deep rev I had heard hundreds of times whenever Mark used to arrive at my parents' house. I froze with the water dripping from my chin. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to accuse anyone without reason. But the timing, it was too perfect. I dried my hands quickly and walked to the living room, pretending I wasn't in a hurry. And there he was, Mark, standing at the door like he owned the place, holding that smug grin he wore like perfume. Sarah walked toward him with a smile she hadn't given me in months. Not a wife greeting her husband. Not someone welcoming a guest. But something in between, too warm, too amused, too familiar. "Hey," she said, almost whispering. "Hey," he replied, in a tone that lingered just a little too long. That moment, that tiny exchange, I still remember how it felt. My heart didn't break suddenly. It cracked bit by bit, like ice under pressure. Mark looked at me with a fake casual expression. "Bro, can I borrow some tools?" "Need to tighten something on the bike." I nodded slowly, unable to form words. I walked to the shed to get the toolbox. And when I opened the shed door, I froze. The motorcycle was parked inside. Cold, untouched. There was dust on the seat, fresh dust, meaning it hadn't been moved since morning. But I had just heard a motorcycle arrive. My chest tightened. My breath caught midair. My hands felt cold around the handle of the toolbox. Of course, he came on another bike. Whose? And why was he hiding it? My legs felt heavy as I walked back toward the house. I kept telling myself I was mistaken, that I was imagining things, that I wasn't the kind of man who doubted his own wife. But why did the truth feel so close? Before I stepped inside, I heard their voices. Not flirting, not laughing, but whispering. Whispering in the tone people use when they don't want someone else to hear. My name wasn't mentioned, but I could feel the weight of it in their conversation. Like I was the ghost haunting the room. I entered quietly. They both stopped mid-sentence. Sarah stepped away from him a little too quickly. Mark cleared his throat and scratched the back of his neck, not in embarrassment, but annoyance. I placed the toolbox beside him. "Here." "Thanks," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. Sarah walked to the kitchen, not once looking back at me. After Mark left, the house felt suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed while Sarah changed into more casual clothes. I kept thinking about the motorcycle, the whispers, the lies, the way she stood closer to him than she had stood to me in months. I finally gathered the courage to speak. "Sarah, is everything okay between us?" She paused, her hands freezing mid-air as she folded her shirt. "Why wouldn't it be? You seem distant." She sighed heavily and turned to face me. "You're overthinking again. You always do this." That word again. The one that made me feel like a fool. I swallowed hard. "If something is going on, I'd rather you tell me." She looked away. "There's nothing going on." But her voice wasn't steady. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes refused to meet mine. "I just need some space," she said finally. Space. A simple word with a heavy meaning. Space from what? Space from me? Or space to continue something behind my back? That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept with her back turned toward me, the empty space between us wider than ever. Every breath she took felt like a reminder of how far she had drifted. The next day, things got worse. While I was walking home from work, I saw a motorcycle, the same one I heard yesterday, parked 2 streets away from my house. And before I could even think straight, I saw Mark step off it. He looked around as if checking whether someone was watching. He didn't see me. I hid behind a parked van and watched him take out his phone, smile at something on the screen, and then walk quickly toward my street. My heart pounded painfully. My legs felt weak. My mind screamed at me to stop watching, to turn away, to pretend nothing was happening. But I followed him. Not fast, not dramatically, just quietly, step by step, like a man finally accepting the truth he never wanted to see. He walked toward my house. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He entered directly, with a key. A key. A key to my home. A key he should not have. A key Sarah must have given him. Something inside me shattered. Not loudly, not violently, just a deep, cold breaking like glass cracking beneath ice. I stood frozen behind the wall at the corner of the street, staring at the door he disappeared through. My chest felt hollow. My breath came out in short, painful bursts. My hands shook uncontrollably. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about anger, revenge, or confrontation. I was thinking about every year I spent being loyal, every moment I stayed silent, every sacrifice I made, every night I came home tired but smiling, every argument I avoided to keep the peace. All of it. For what? I didn't go home immediately. I sat on a bench near the old bakery, staring at the ground as the sun slowly began to set. The world kept moving, cars passing, kids laughing, people talking, but for me, everything felt silent. Even breathing hurt. Hours later, when I finally returned, Sarah was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing happened. She looked up at me with a calm face. Too calm. "You're late," she said. But I didn't respond. Because if I opened my mouth then, my entire world would collapse. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. But one thing was certain. The cracks weren't small anymore. They were turning into fractures. And soon, everything was going to break. The days that followed felt like I was living underwater. Every sound was muffled. Every movement slowed. Every glance from Sarah felt heavier than the last. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep at night, and even the smallest things seemed like they carried hidden messages meant only for me to misunderstand. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining anything anymore. Something had changed. Everything had changed. I could feel it in the air, in the way my own home now felt like a stranger's house. And the worst part wasn't just Mark or Sarah, it was the realization that I had been blind for years, letting them move in and out of my life without noticing, letting my silence be used against me, letting trust slip through my fingers like sand. One evening, I came home earlier than usual from work. The streets were quiet, the sun low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the pavement. As I approached the house, I noticed Mark's motorcycle parked at the side again. It wasn't unusual for him to visit, but the way it was angled, close to the back gate, told me something. Something deliberate. My stomach twisted with unease, but I walked inside anyway, keeping my steps silent, careful, almost like a detective watching a crime scene unfold. Inside, Sarah was in the kitchen. She glanced up, gave me a quick smile, then returned to whatever she was doing on her phone. The house smelled faintly of coffee, bread, and that subtle perfume she wore, a scent I knew too well. A scent that now made my chest ache with memories of when things used to feel safe. I didn't say a word, didn't want to interrupt. Instead, I walked to the living room, glanced at the shed door, and froze. The door was slightly ajar. Not fully open, just enough to notice that someone had been inside. My heart pounded. My breath caught in my throat. And then I saw it, the motorcycle. Mark's first motorcycle. The one I had let him keep in the shed. And next to it, not one, but two small envelopes, carefully tucked under a coil of rope, neat as if someone had spent time arranging them. I crouched and picked them up. My hands were shaking. Inside were bank statements, loan papers, and receipts I didn't recognize at first. As I flipped through them, my blood ran cold. Every number, every signature, every amount told the same story. Mark had been taking money out of our joint account. Loans were being taken in my name. Bills were being paid that I had no knowledge of. The motorcycle, the trips, the hidden keys, it all began to make sense. And in that moment, the weight of years of trust, patience, and silence pressed down on me like a stone. I spent the next hour going through every document. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't call Sarah or Mark. I simply traced every transaction, every signature. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, a pattern emerged, so clear it felt like someone had drawn it in bold letters across my life. Mark wasn't just reckless. He wasn't just entitled. He had been taking advantage of my patience, my responsibility, my silence for years. And Sarah, somehow she had known, or at least allowed it. Every small glance, every sudden smile when he was around, every overthinking comment, it all fit. It all led to the same conclusion. I felt rage, but not the kind that bursts out and destroys everything in the moment. This was slow, deliberate, careful. It simmered like a fire just below the surface. Every memory of being ignored, dismissed, blamed, and manipulated now fueled a resolve that had been dormant for years. I realized that if I acted recklessly, I'd lose everything. I'd be the same person who had stayed silent and let life be stolen. This time, I had to be smarter. This time, I had to take control. The following days, I began observing them. Not in a paranoid way, not like a spy in a thriller, but with purpose. Every phone call, every small interaction, every subtle look became data I collected in my mind. Mark's habits, his schedules, his patterns. Sarah's subtle signs when she tried to hide something, when she let a small truth slip. The more I watched, the more the plan started forming. I didn't need to confront them yet. I didn't need to accuse them yet. I only needed evidence, clarity, and timing. Then came the night that sealed my decision. Mark had a party at his friend's house, which he bragged about to Sarah in passing. She had said she wasn't going, but I knew from the way she smiled that she would. I waited until both of them left, then sat alone in the living room. The house felt completely mine, silent, empty, like the calm before a storm. I pulled out the folders, the papers, the receipts, and for the first time, I started organizing them. Bank statements in one pile, loan documents in another, pictures of the motorcycles, keys, everything. Every single piece of evidence was now mapped out. As I worked, I realized something else. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It wasn't about yelling, screaming, or destroying. It was about taking back control, restoring balance, making sure the truth finally came to light. And for the first time in months, I felt clarity, purpose, and a strange sense of calm. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, double-checking every detail, imagining every scenario. What would happen if I confronted them directly? What if I exposed everything at once? Or should I wait, build a more deliberate strategy, make the truth undeniable? The longer I thought about it, the clearer it became. I needed patience, precision, and most importantly, timing. By the time the first light of dawn touched the city streets, my mind was made up. This wasn't about petty revenge. This wasn't about proving a point. This was about reclaiming my life, protecting myself, and finally ensuring that the years of manipulation, lies, and betrayal didn't win. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but focused, and whispered to myself, "It ends now." Everything ends now. The days that followed my discovery were some of the longest I had ever lived. I moved through the house silently, carefully, like a man navigating a battlefield. Every glance at Sarah, every casual remark from Mark was now scrutinized, catalogued, and remembered. I wasn't angry in the usual sense anymore. Anger is loud and chaotic. This was calm, deliberate, a quiet fire smoldering inside, a storm waiting for the perfect moment to break. I had a plan, a strategy, and every small piece of evidence I had gathered was a brick in the structure I was about to build. I started small. Every transaction I could trace, every receipt, every suspicious movement, I documented meticulously. I photographed documents, copied digital records, saved messages, everything. I was building a map of their deception, a timeline that could not be denied. I spent late nights cross-referencing every number, noting inconsistencies, piecing together a pattern that told a story far more damning than anything I had feared. I noticed patterns in Mark's behavior that even he didn't seem aware of. The way he forgot small amounts he had withdrawn. The way he miscalculated payments. The way he always tried to cover tracks at the last minute but failed in small, subtle ways. Every mistake he made became a thread I could pull to unravel the larger picture. Sarah's complicity, though less overt, was equally clear. Not once did she challenge him on discrepancies. Not once did she question why sudden payments were being made or why small amounts were disappearing from our account. She smiled at him, covered for him, excused him, and in her silence she became part of the pattern. It wasn't malicious in the same way as Mark's actions, it was passive, but it mattered. One evening, I decided it was time to take the first step. They had gone out, believing the house was empty. I used the quiet hours to organize everything in a binder. Each section had a clear label: financial misuse, hidden transactions, physical evidence, patterns of deception. I made it neat, undeniable, indisputable. Every document was backed with cross-references, every inconsistency explained. By the time I finished, I sat back in my chair and exhaled. It wasn't revenge yet, it was preparation. But the moment of payoff was close. The night they returned, I was waiting. I had set the binder on the dining table, right in the center. Mark entered first, confident, careless, still thinking he had everything under control. Sarah followed, calm, pretending everything was normal. Their combined confidence hit me like a wave, but I didn't flinch. I simply gestured toward the binder. "This," I said quietly, "is everything." Mark looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. "Everything what?" he asked. I didn't answer. I opened the binder, flipped to the first page. Receipts, signed documents, bank statements. Each one meticulously highlighted. I watched his face slowly change as he flipped through the pages. The smirk that had been his constant companion faded. Confusion became panic. Panic became dread. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what I had done. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for words, but none came. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't imagined I had been paying attention, that I had been collecting evidence, that I had been patient. Mark finally spoke, voice trembling slightly. "This isn't—" "It is," I interrupted softly. "Every transaction, every lie, everything you tried to hide. It's all here. I've been watching, keeping track, and documenting everything. I knew what was happening long before today. And now, there's no way to deny it." He turned to Sarah, trying to shift blame, trying to find an ally, but even she looked stunned, cornered, silent. "You were supposed to trust me," I continued. "You were supposed to be honest. Instead, you both used my silence against me. But that ends now. Everything ends now." The room was quiet. Even the air felt thick. My voice, calm and steady, carried more weight than any shouting ever could. I saw the realization in their faces. The smirk replaced with fear. The confidence replaced with shame. "You've stolen from me," I said, "and you've broken my trust. And for what? A motorcycle? A few loans? A sense of control over my life? None of it matters if you're caught. And now you are." I called the bank, the creditors, and the authorities. I showed them the binder, the transactions, the evidence. Everything I had meticulously documented became official. Mark tried to argue, tried to lie, but the evidence was undeniable. Sarah tried to plead ignorance, but it didn't matter. The truth was now visible to everyone, impossible to hide. The final moment of Gendendave realization for them was complete when the authorities confirmed everything. Mark faced legal consequences, loans were frozen, and every dollar misappropriated was documented for recovery. Sarah had to answer questions about her role, her complacency, and for the first time, she understood the gravity of silence, the danger of ignoring truth, the price of pretending everything was normal. As I watched them face the consequences, I felt something I hadn't in years: relief. It wasn't gloating. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was validation, the satisfaction of seeing the truth finally acknowledged, of reclaiming control over my life. I could breathe again. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months was gone. That night, I sat alone in the living room, looking at the empty space where deception had lived for so long. The house felt mine again, not because the others were punished, but because I had taken responsibility for my own life. Silence was no longer a tool of others against me. It was mine to use, mine to protect myself. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully, knowing that honesty, patience, and careful observation had given me a victory that no anger or shouting could have achieved. The storm had passed. The cracks in the wall had widened, but they revealed the truth beneath. And in that revelation, I found freedom. Sometimes revenge isn't about anger. It's about patience. It's about noticing the cracks, gathering the evidence, and waiting for the right moment to reclaim your life. It's about understanding that silence is not weakness. It can be a shield until the right time comes. And when the truth finally emerges, the satisfaction is not in punishment, but in the justice, the clarity, and the knowledge that you were right all along. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. Tell us in the comments what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed, and subscribe for more stories where patience, observation, and truth triumph over betrayal.